Hello, my name's Richard Elliott, and once again I'm here with Matthew Head following our previous discussion, dyslexia in the workplace. And we're here to talk about Matt's experiences with the gift of dyslexia, the book that he's kindly sent to me to read as well, and the dyslexia correction course, for want of a better word, that he's taken part in, and his learnings and experiences with it.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, we're back at doing this again. And so, yes, I sent you the book of gifted dyslexia, didn't I, to give you some homework before we started doing this.
Finished uni, thought homework was behind me, but no.
Yeah.
So I've spent the odd evening over the last couple of weeks reading through the book. It's been interesting.
Yes, it's quite a short read, isn't it?
It is, yeah. It's a short read, although every so often I sort of started trying to go through the tasks myself, and I can understand why in the book it tells you not to do this by yourself.
Yes.
It's very difficult to sort of play both parts in your head when you're not speaking out loud as well.
Yes. Yeah, don't do the task by yourselves. There's quite a lot of disclaimers that tell you not to do that. The book is by Ronald Davis and his association, the Davis Association. And I did a guest blog post on their website, and the moderator, editor of the website, when she was sort of sending me emails back saying, I like your posts and like your website, Dyslexia Life Hacks, I really recommend you read this book. So, awesome. Okay. I will give that a read. And I actually stuck it on my Audible list because I always listen to audiobooks. And chucked it on the car over the Christmas break, driving back and forth, listening to it, and was like, oh my God. So initially there's the beginning of the book starts off with some quite good sound design in terms of recreating a young boy nervous in the classroom, being put in the corner, told off and not understanding what's going on and praying the lesson's going over, and then being called stupid and all that kind of stuff. And it full on does it with sound design as well. And it's like, oh, this is back to a painful memory. So I think I listened to that slowly over 2 or 3 times, like, oh my God, this is really painful. I hope the whole book's not like this.
Yeah, it's very very helpful, sort of illustrating to someone like myself who is not dyslexic. Those first few paragraphs really helpful to understand sort of what the world is like and sort of understand dyslexia a little bit more.
Yes, it is. And it's like, gets into the emotional side of it. After it's done the preface, you get into the sort of the Davis Ronalds theory. And the more I'm listening to it, I'm like, whoa, this describes how I think. Like, oh my word, this is really weird. Like, I've not read anything, and I've read a few books on dyslexia, and I'm not well versed in all the books on dyslexia. It's something I'm still working through. But quite a lot are not necessarily aimed at me. They're aimed at a teacher of a child with dyslexia or a parent with a child with dyslexia. And this one I'm sort of describing, and it does a really good job. It's got a sentence midway through the book about a horse jumping over a wall and running through a prairie, through a pasture, I think it is actually. And then he breaks it down into how a dyslexic person would read that. And it goes into the disorientation. I think you've read the same sentence, haven't you?
Yes. Yeah. I thought that was a really good section of the book, really sort of helpful. And I remember I tried to sort of do it myself. Sort of he talks about how the dyslexic individual will sort of read and visualize each word in the passage and then stop, and he refers to confusion and disorientation. And yeah, the sort of trigger words that he describes,
yes,
as causing this. It's not really something I ever really thought about, but even for myself, I get to those words and go, yeah, actually you can see how this sort of breaks down.
Yeah. The idea is you're reading, a dyslexic person reads in pictures. So all the words have got pictures for, like horse comes as a picture of a horse, brown horse. But then when it hits like there's no picture for the. So the picture sort of loses its kind of focus, I guess. Then wall, so wall comes in, horse over, whatever. I can't remember the exact structure of the sentence, but every time you hit the over and all that kind of stuff, each time you have to try, your brain has to try a little bit harder to keep the picture in. And like wall will come in, and it will be a picture of a wall. And then the horse has to somehow come in, but the horse is it's all kind of lost. And it gets to the point where it goes to say the word through, and that just becomes thought. So now the sentence makes no sense anymore. The horse thought through the pasture. That what?
Yeah.
And it's how these little words make the thing fall over because they're not pictures.
Yeah, I mean, I almost sort of visualized it as, sort of an old TV that you tune in.
Yeah.
And first couple of trigger words is the picture goes a bit static. And then by the last one, where through becomes throw or thought or whatever, it's you almost, when you're adjusting the picture, you've changed to a different channel.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, and it comes in and goes out.
Each trigger word is a static. And then as you tune it, you've got the wrong word, and it's actually a different channel you're watching, and it now makes no sense.
Yes, and that's exactly it. And the idea is by the time you got to the end of that sentence, and I totally feel this, you go, well, reading was painful. Thank God I don't have to read that again. Or you read it again, and it still makes no sense because you read the same words. What you think you are meant to be reading. And it's like, well, this is super painful and I don't want to do this again. So you shut the book and are done for the day and go do something else that's far more interesting. I remember reading that sentence and like, that is totally it. And it's one of the reasons that I sent a copy of the book to my girlfriend and my mum for them to read it. And because just the beginning section of the book sums up so much stuff in such a well, concise way that it's like, wow. And that's it. The whole idea that this disorientation happens and it's the threshold for it. So each time you hit one of these trigger words, you hit a little bit of confusion. And then the next one's a bit more, the next one's a bit more, the next one's a bit more until full disorientation happens. And then the sentence is lost and the reading's a painful experience. I've done my word count for the day. I will put the book down and do something else. Or the classic one of... we had that thing called Books and Beyond when we were at school, and I used to lie about how many pages I'd read each week for that fundraising charity thing we had to do with how many pages could you read in a week. It was always,
oh yeah,
what's a reasonable number? That looks right. They never questioned it. I don't even know what the book was I read for it. I just remember lying about how much I'd read.
What did the person ahead of me say? Were they a really strong reader? Let's go a little bit below that.
Yeah, whatever Richard Martin and T said, I will do 100 less. So that sort of really got me. The idea is dyslexia is all about being a picture thinker versus more of a narrative thinker.
It's sort of interesting. His theories are that dyslexia is almost it's a learned condition.
Yeah.
And it's a learned condition because of something that someone who has the dyslexic symptoms, their brain is able to do, and it's the way their brain works differently to, he maybe calls them neurotypicals or whatever, the way their brain sort of processes things differently to perhaps other people's, but the education system is built to teach people who see and hear words in their mind rather than pictures. And it's a condition that develops from that.
Yeah. So you think when you're reading as a neurotypical person, from what I understand, there is kind of the narrative going on in your head of whatever you're reading. As a visual thinker, as we've just discussed about thinking in pictures. But the example it uses in the book is a cat. A dyslexic child, even though they can't move their head, can make the mental leap that the elbow they can see hanging over their cot is related to their mother because they move their mind's eye around to fill in the pictures, where a neurotypical person doesn't do that. As a toddler, they wander in this room and there's a cat curled up in the corner. They bought the boy a kitten, I think, in this case. And he sees the kitten, basically does the Matrix-style 3D look round it, can uncoil this curled up kitten in his brain and knows it's a kitten, where like a neurotypical person doesn't necessarily do that. They have to go explore and realize it. That's fine until you hit a classroom and they write the letters CAT on the blackboard, whiteboard, depending on when you went to school.
Yes.
I'm like blackboard, but I'm aging myself terribly. So they see them letters. The brain does the same thing. It disorientates, it spins it around, 3D all the way around, upside down. You imagine putting letters upside down, and there's a page in the book that shows them multiple different ways the letters are spun inside out and backwards. And quite a lot of people know one of the symptoms of dyslexia is flipping B's and D's around. And they just come up with nothing. It doesn't make any sense to them. Like, it's just this horrible thing. And then it carries on like that. Well, they keep trying to teach you like it. And eventually you get to the point where the emotion side of it comes from it. And I full on get that. We talked about in our first podcast, turning up and you've written pages like 3 inches thick for argument's sake, and I've written 4 pages. So you get the emotional side because you start thinking, well, hang on, I just can't do this. But what the Davis method is really about is teaching in a way your brain understands. And we'll definitely get onto this later on in the podcast, but like modeling words out, 3D, modeling the alphabet. So then you end up with the right pictures. So as you see the word cats, you've got the picture, and a picture of the cat comes up. So you've got the meaning as well as that, rather than learning it phonetically.
Yeah. I mean, he talks about sort of bringing a sort of way of thinking that deals exceptionally well with physical objects and perceiving the world through objects, trying to deal with a world that communicates through symbols.
Yes.
That only makes sense in a particular order, in a particular orientation, in a particular combination.
Yes.
And when they sort of get mixed up, you view a cat from any angle and it's a cat from any angle, but you view a letter from different angles and it could potentially be it's either meaningless or it's a different letter in some cases.
It's a B to a D or a P into a Q.
Or an I to an exclamation mark.
Yes, yeah.
Because he talks about punctuation in the book as well. And
it's also the relentless pace of it. I can't remember what the numbers are, but say a narrative thinker thinks in like 6 thoughts a minute. A picture thinker could do 25. And we all know picture's 1,000 words. So the brain is clicking through faster. So when it goes down the wrong alley, it's a lot faster down there than if you were going through it narratively. Let's see what your imagination's like, actually. So there's a part in the book because it does this test in terms of have you got this perceptual ability? And it's like imagine a cake on your hand. And a dyslexic person is able to, without physically moving in space with their eyes closed, is able to view the cake from any angle and describe it perfectly. Like I remember doing a chocolate orange cake with the frosting in the middle, all that kind of stuff. And one of the reasons dyslexic people are good at talking is because I see the picture and I'm now telling you it. Now, you said you had a go at trying to do some of the exercises. How did you find that kind of imagination thing? If I put something on the desk in front of you, would you be able to necessarily look around it?
I think I'd probably struggle unless I was quite familiar. I mean, when I was doing it, it was reading the exercise and playing both parts, which at some point I was just like, no, I'm just going to read this to learn the technique. I'm just trying to do it at the same time.
It tells you not to do that.
Yeah, exactly. There were a few parts of the book where I was sort of trying to put myself in the position of the person being talked to, just to, right, okay, this is what you were being told to do.
Yes.
And then after so many steps, it was like, no, I can't keep track of this at the same time. And
yes. So I think that's probably, do you know what? It reminds me, and you may want me to cut this. You phoned me once and your 405 had gone flat and you didn't know how to jumpstart it when you were at uni. And I remember telling you vividly in pictures how to jumpstart it. And you're just like, I need to do what and what. And in the end, I had to tell you using parallel and series circuit theory and the diagrams off the page from like science. And you're like, oh, I get it now. So I think maybe that might be a good example of actually, once I told you the textbook theory, you got the diagram, the parallel circuit diagram of it, you got it. But me trying to tell you with like, put this here and do this in like the picture. And I worked as a mechanic at the time. So I was sort of stood by Richard's car in my brain, visualizing doing it, and just couldn't work out what I was telling you. And so I went back, remember electronics from school, and it's this theory. And you're like, right, that makes sense now. So maybe that's an example of how the two of us think really differently. Maybe that's the kind of the imagination ability that I have versus the sort of...
let's say it's that rather than my complete uselessness with cars.
Might be that all. It may be.
I've managed to change tyres by myself, so
I don't know why that comes to me. As we were sort of saying with the thinking in pictures, and it is the school system does cater to sort of 75% of the people. And if you're outside of that, then you are being taught in a way that doesn't suit your brain. And that's kind of the idea behind it. You actually end up learning the dyslexia thing.
Yeah, he talks about learning sort of shortcuts and cheats and things that simulate what everybody else is doing, but doesn't give you the comprehension that.
So I think the best analogy is if school teaches you how to use a PC, but you're actually a Mac. So If you try using Mac OS like you use Windows, it doesn't really happen, does it?
No, the keys are in the wrong place. And
his method is effectively teaching you how to use Mac OS. What you end up doing is developing what they call old solutions, which is one of the prime examples is singing the alphabet song to work out where a letter is in the alphabet.
That's right. Yeah, he does talk about that quite a lot in the book and the course.
Doesn't everybody do that? Apparently not. It's that sequence, and it's not learnt properly. So what you end up doing is thinking you've learnt it, but what you've learnt is this old solution that allows you to get round the fact that you haven't internalized it, the alphabet. Sing the song. Well, I've got the song. I've always got the alphabet song, which is kind of a little bit limiting to a point. And I never realized it. Just listening to the book, I always do that. I always have to hum the alphabet song. I might not have to start from it. I've remembered it in chunks, but there are about 3 chunks, if that makes sense. Particularly when like picking up guitar recently, where I'm learning the musical alphabet for music theory. I have to go back to A, B, C. Well, this is not very good for writing songs, is it? And not being able to skip them very well. I have to sing them through. I don't know about yourself. Do you ever have to sing the alphabet song as a 30-something?
Occasionally, maybe. but yeah, I was hoping not to have to admit that. But yeah, I think mnemonics are a tool that the alphabet song, I guess, is sort of a fairly sort of basic one. But mnemonics are a tool that I think a lot of people use.
Yes,
I know you got the sort of rainbow that people will use.
The rainbow
to help remember the rainbow.
Oh yes. And I think mnemonics it's a good tool for getting you there. But I think the theory is, and it's right. Until I did the program, I would sing the alphabet song to work out what letters are in the alphabet until I was 37, nearly 37. Yeah. And at some point, mnemonics go away, and you have to.
Yeah, I mean they're a crutch to help. So if you can learn it without, I'll sort of run through letters in my head and hear the alphabet song sometimes.
Yeah, and I think we all do a little bit. Like even now, done the alphabet in the program, and sometimes I can still NMNOP because that just I could always sing that forever. But yeah, it's kind of having them what they call old solutions, and as you go through the program, they disappear because you just don't need them anymore. They'll creep in occasionally, but you really don't need them anymore. So you get rid of the old solutions, and there are various different ones, but the classic one, it focused on the alphabet song. But listening to the book and got to the point where it starts going over where you are or where you were reading with the how to do the method. And it obviously says, you can't teach yourself this because, as much as you've learned to be an autodidact, being dyslexic, it's tricky to, I can teach yourself this. I teach myself everything. Control.
Sort of reading it, this definitely needs somebody writing and showing this to you and guiding you through the process.
At that point, I had a fire under my feet. It's like, oh my God, I've got to do this program. I can't believe there is a way of, to me, by that point, it felt like something I was fixed with. Like, I'm at this point, this is my comprehension of English language. For anybody who's not listened to the first episode, my writing and spelling abilities, particularly where mine manifests itself the most. And it's like, well, this is where I am. This is what it is. I can work around it. I've got this. I can use your software. I can do all these things. And I'm doing quite well anyway. And then all of a sudden, you're like, I literally that morning, I was listening to it on Audible downstairs and was like on my phone emailing the local Davis facilitator, who's the lady called Tessa. And by that evening, we're having a Zoom call. And she's talking through and she does the brief prelims. She's like, well, yeah, you have the imagination and the perceptual ability to be able to do this program. And that was quite emotional, I must admit. I can't think of a good analogy, but yeah, I remember driving somewhere afterwards and being quite upset about it, really, because it's like, hang on, I just thought this was the way things are, and now you're telling me it doesn't have to be. Yeah, that was I was quite emotional that evening, really. Then we fast forward, we're on the course.
So you've completed the course now, or
Yes. So completed the course. You have to do this thing called symbol mastery, and it's 250 trigger words, as we already spoke about, that I have to master. But I'm on my way. I'm 50 words into that, so I'm on my way. But I finished the formal part of the course. The course is a week long, sort of 7-hour days, hour lunch, and you do it. It started off first thing with getting orientated, because I don't think we've touched on the mind's eye bit yet, have we?
No. I was just going to sort of say about I think we've mentioned trigger words and what they do, but I don't know. We've not really discussed on almost what they are and why they're trigger words.
Yeah. So the idea is that you've got your mind's eye. It's kind of the imagination eye, I guess. When you hear me talk about disorientation, it's the mind's eye moving around to do stuff. So when it's trying to work out, as we did the example with the cat earlier, the mind's eye can spin round the central point of the cat and see it from every angle to work out it's a cat. But you have no control over it. So you imagine this mind's eye moves around, drifts wherever it goes, wherever it fancies, whenever it fancies. So if I'm writing something down and I've written it, and even if I've left it 5-10 minutes, come back to reread it, my mind's eye will just disorientate over the place and read what I think it says. So all the homophones, a standard one, wrong there in it, all that kind of stuff. And that's it. So you don't know particularly when you're reading, because of all this kind of thing, that your mind's eye's disappeared off and it's disorientated because it's what it's trying to do and it's trying to work for you. It's one of the, an example of the mind's eye thing is Einstein come up with the theory of relativity because he imagined himself swimming along the side of it all, and then he had to write it down. But that's him disorientating, using his mind eye to disorientate to imagine the theory of relativity and swimming alongside it all and all the physics, and then putting it into equations. That's how it come to him, and there's various other examples of that. And that's when it works in your favor. However, as we've spoken about, it starts working against you by spinning the letters around and all that kind of fun stuff.
Yeah, I mean, he in the book, he again continues his example with cat, where he's just seen this ball and recognized what it is using his mind's eye. But when he had to read the word cat on a page, the letters spin, they move, and cat becomes act. The letters all sort of move around, so they're not even a recognizable word. They change order, flip round, like you said. B becomes D. Obviously not in cat, but
what version of cat have you got? B becomes D, but not in cat. Yeah. And that's it, using itself, the sort of mnemonics, taking that mind's eye and kind of it ends up sort of twisting itself around a little bit. So the first thing you need to do is have a method of making sure that is where it's supposed to be, so your actual eyes and your mind's eye are seeing the same thing. Whereas my facilitator likes to say, you blow a whistle to call it onto its space. So they refer to it as being on point. So they do an exercise that gets you orientated, gets everything lined up, and you basically imagine that your mind's eye sat at the end of a couple of anchor lines, a hook on the back of your head and on your ears, and you can see them. So it's like, I guess because I'm an engineer that likes motor racing, I for some reason mine are carbon fibre, so I can see the weave of the carbon fibre as I'm looking at it. They also teach you some relaxation techniques to get you in a calm place, because you imagine if you're stressed or anxious, the threshold of being disorientated lowers. It's weird. I feel like, and everybody's different apparently, I kind of feel like when my mind's eye is on point, I can kind of see the end of the anchor lines, but I also feel this thing in the back of my head, and I can't describe it, but that's how it feels like. You just get used to the feeling of it.
Very interesting. And when I read that section in the book, I hadn't really considered that not only he talks about anchor lines, and he sort of talks about explaining what an anchor is to whoever you're teaching, because you're teaching different age groups potentially.
Yes.
But I hadn't really considered the visualization of the lines themselves, or what they might look like. And that might be something that helps the person sort of actually anchor their mind's eye in a particular place.
Yeah.
Because he talks about that method, and he has a second method as well for doing.
Yes, I'm not too familiar with the second method because it's a sort of secondary thing if the visualization is not working for you as much. Yeah, but I could probably reach down and put my finger away where my mind's eye is. There you go, which is no good for audio.
Yeah, I thought it was good because he talks about in the book sort of picking one method and using that method and not using the other one because they'll sort of confuse each other.
Yes.
And then using an exercise earlier in the book to identify which one that you should be using.
Yeah, in my particular case, I'm quite visual. So I did the visual version of it, which, from what I understand, other people they might be wooden anchor lines, steel lines, bits of concrete. Mine are nice carbon fiber F1 wishbones for some reason.
Any sponsorship?
Yeah. Sparker written down there or something. Sponsorship. You get the mind's eye where it is. So it's now called back on its point. You know that when it's on that point, what your eyes and your mind's eye are doing are the same thing. And that's kind of the morning. And then we model the alphabet in uppercase first. And you have to sort of master the alphabet. So basically you end up slotting the picture in your head. And because you're a visual thinker, once the picture's stored in your head, it's stored and you can just zoom in on the bit you need to work out where the letters are of the alphabet. But it's interesting. I was trying to do this and I'd modeled the alphabet, model the letters the same size. There's a type font it wants you to use, so it's all kind of nice and in there. That's your mastered alphabet. The gift of dyslexia is the gift of mastery. So you're actually able to master things like this faster once you've done the work because the picture's in your head and it doesn't disappear anywhere. So you actually benefit then from the speed of mastering it. Quite interesting. It was getting me to try and quiz me on it, and certain letters would just kind of not work. So then you have to pick the letters up and kind of hold it in your hand and try and think of reasons why this letter doesn't work. Is there any kind of attachment to it and all this kind of stuff? And that was fascinating, really, because Q doesn't have the little flick on the tail of it.
Yes, was that something he talks about in the book as well, isn't it? The different typefaces, that some are inherently a nightmare for dealing with dyslexia because of all the flourishes and
the pretty ones basically. Yes, which I quite like. I really quite like the calligraphy kind of stuff. But it's really interesting trying to master the alphabet with a Q without a flick on it. It looks like a P, doesn't it? The little flick on the Q differentiates it from a P. And it was like, oh yeah, and you have to kind of it's almost washing the alphabet clean of any attachment. And back to the mind's eye thing, what you have to do is make sure you're aware if your mind's eye is on point, because what it will do is directly it gets to a sticking point, it tries to hunt for a solution. So it comes off point.
Starts to drift.
Yes. So it sort of comes and hunts and then comes back. And it's...
Yeah, he talks about as the sort of partner in it, recognizing the signs of frustration and fatigue and sort of saying, right, stop. Are you centered? Move your perspective back to your point, which I thought was quite interesting.
Yes, hence why you can't do it on your own, because
you can't watch for those signs.
Yeah. If your mind's eye disorientates the world, which helps you with stuff, but it'll also disorientate the world to make you think you're doing it right.
Yeah.
And it amazes me, even though we were doing it during the COVID-19 pandemic, so doing it over Zoom, my facilitator, Tessa, could pick up that this was, well, what was that? You're reading a letter and I'd half pause or something. What's wrong with this letter? And we go back and, see things. I hit P and it's like, what's up with P? Well, it's my P is the first initial of my dad's name. So I was like, oh, it's that. And then it reminded me of, the Paul Peter kind of thing we used to remember at school. The little, the alphabet had, each letter had like a symbol drawn around it. And at my school, it was Paul Peter. It's like a dog who had hanging down ears and pointing up ears and all that kind of stuff. And it was just as I hit P, my brain would think of that and just shift onto that to visualize that picture. And it actually is like a disorientation of the letter P. So it's like, right, okay. So we kind of go through the little bit of the sort of sequencing works. And we did that. And by the end of that day, we did lower cases afterwards. That's it, alphabet mastered. What, in one afternoon? Hang on. Whoa. Come back here. What? And that's it, yeah. I've not had to look at the alphabet again. One thing I had noticed, now I don't really suffer too much of flipping B's and D's, or so I thought. But directly I'd done the alphabet mastery, I was looking at a post in my living room. Well, them letters seem a bit nicer. Like they just sit on the page nicer. Are you aware of what visual stress is? Where some dyslexic people some people describe it as having a light burning through the back of the page, or the letters float and hover. Now, I've never noticed that so much. But I noticed after I'd done Alphabet Mastery, I'm looking at this poster like, well, them symbols are a lot comfier. To the point where I've turned the Open Dyslexic font off on my Kindle and just read on standard Kindle font now, because I don't need it. Because Open Dyslexic font is way in such a way that all the letters look different to stop you disorientating the letters. Well, I'm not doing that anymore, so I don't need the tool. But it is a great tool, and it's got me loads of novels read by reading rather than listening. But I've turned it off now because I could just use a normal font.
Yeah, it's amazing that something that I guess it's not necessarily going to be overcome by everybody in one session, like you found, but something that has potentially caused a problem for so long, corrected so easily, or adjusted for so easily, if you know how to do it.
It's amazing. Like it surprises me. Like once you get into the words, like the hard bit is modeling the words. Mastering the word is easy. It's a relaxation thing, then a sequence. Mastering is a minute and a half tops. It's getting the model done might take half hour, 40 minutes. Yeah, I can't get over the mastery thing. It's insane. It's just like, what? So what else do I need to do with this now? Do I need to come back tomorrow and master it again to make sure? Because I had to sleep on it. My brain's thought about it. No. You got the picture in your head of the alphabet. Away you go. Oh.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay.
That's handy.
I was getting wild. Like, can I master the piano keys on the piano, writing all the notes underneath them or something? But I haven't got that far yet. I haven't gone completely crazy yet. Just model the world. And then, as you said, like the grammar and punctuation was another thing that trips it up. So we did that. I modelled all the punctuation symbols out.
I'll be honest. I was getting to this, and I was thinking, right, I'm going to have to get Matt to teach me punctuation because mine's terrible sometimes. If Matt's now mastered this, right.
But the best thing I found about that was that Treddy had done it. Not only did I not know that the 3 dots is called ellipsis, which is a great word.
Yep.
And then when you see something,
go on, you should know that from Casino Royale.
Should I? Is that in that movie?
I'm sure it's Casino Royale.
Maybe. But I was like, oh, cool. It's just a great word. But the weird thing is, you're reading a line of text and somebody puts 2 dots or 4 dots. You're like, that's wrong. Like, this is what people who are really into grammar feel like. From being completely oblivious to it. Yeah.
So you're becoming one of the grammar aficionados that we discussed last time.
Yeah, the grammaristas.
The grammaristas, that was it.
Yes. But it's really interesting because I've described it, I was talking to someone this morning, it's like the editor has now come in to work after a long time on vacation, like most of my life. I don't know how many millions of text messages you got from me over the years. So my phone, being as clever as it is, will obviously always put THERE in for there, no matter what context of there I'm using. But of course, I've modelled THEIR version of there, the possessive version, during the course. So now I put the regular there in, and as I'm reading the message before I send it, the editor's like, that's the wrong word. Hey, where did you come from? What are you doing here? Yes, it is the wrong word. I'll delete that, put the right one in. And the same with silly things like mastering comma. So the contractions become a bit more obvious. So they are, where before it's kind of like, yeah, there is that version of it. But I think anything I wrote always used one version of there until recently. So it's quite funny. The editor has now turned up. Yeah, we did grammar the next morning, and then we started getting into, there's a few other stuff they do. We're just checking things through and some of the sounds and stuff. And I guess the sort of poster child of it, I guess, would be the symbol mastery. And the symbol mastery is, as we've talked about already, the trigger words. As we described in that sentence earlier, every time you hit the, and, on, whatever, then words act as a trigger because there's no picture for them.
Yeah, and that was something I found really interesting. It's the words that, and as I sort of mentioned earlier, I think when we touched on it, it's that you don't really think about it. But yes, these are the words that you can, that is very difficult to immediately associate a picture with. As you were talking about your paragraph earlier that Davis discusses.
Yes.
And he talks about a brown horse or a horse, and you immediately see brown horse. and you can see the pasture, you can see the wall, but it's the and on
and over and
that suddenly. Oh, how do I picture that?
So the picture falls over, and there was some of the other stuff we're doing is they do like a what they call a sweep sort of reading thing. I think it's called sweep, and you've got a piece of card over a page of the book, and you're not reading the paragraph for reading it. You're reading each word, and your facilitator or your helper is trying to pick up which words are triggering you, because people do have other words that trigger them for other reasons, and then they're put on a list for stuff to model outside of the 250 key trigger words. And I remember reading one, and it was a guy talking about, I've been talked at many conferences, student unions, all this kind of stuff. And we stopped we do picture punctuation, which is read the sentence at punctuation, tell your facilitator what the picture is. Got there, and it's like, so what picture are you seeing in your head? Well, I've got this guy, the paragraph written by Arnold Schwarzenegger. So I've got Arnie stood by a lectern reading out. She's like, okay. Anything else you want to add to that picture? I can't remember exactly what she said. No, I've got Arnie stood there in a suit looking huge. Because he's always like, Terminator 2 spec Arnie. Yeah. Looking huge with the lectern, looks tiny in front of him. I've got this. She's like, yeah, but it says many. Oh. So he's not just at one location. Because many being a trigger word, I just omitted it from the picture. Once I'd modeled the word many, now if I read that sentence, or how I'm recalling it to you, and the fact I can remember the sentence says something. I now imagine it, like the mosaic on like a Zoom call, where you've got each tile and it's multiple tiles of Arnie stood at multiple lecterns or multiple different stages doing talks in different clothing to signify he's now at many of these things. He's like this multiple kind of view. It's because I have spoken at many conferences, student unions, all this kind of stuff. It's more accurate. I had actually missed a word from the sentence that modified the meaning of the sentence in my memory. And that's where the trigger words come in. So you are having to model this up. So you model the meaning of the word.
That's the bit I found quite interesting, is you can see some of the models that they've used for trying to model these words because they are a bit more sort of abstract. You can't just make a model of an apple.
No.
As an apple, car.
Yeah.
But the and many, you have to sort of think about the words a bit more about a way to visually convey them.
And yet that's what you're trying to model. You have to think of, well, the sort of how you go about it is you do sort of techniques, get yourself on point, read the definition in a dictionary, read it in multiple places. You're trying to find the definition that's sort of not makes sense, but it's the simplest one to model, I guess. So most dictionaries have got the same definition as the first definition for a word. But because dictionaries are copyrighted material, Cambridge and Oxford have to describe the word in slightly different ways for the same meaning. So sometimes looking through two different dictionaries and using the one that just makes sense to you better, the one that feels nicer.
Yeah.
And then it's thinking about modeling the word, which is really hard, as you said. How do you model A? Because A doesn't mean anything. Well, it does. It's a single thing, but it can be anything. It's just a thing. So I did a bunch of bananas with one banana on its own. A banana. It's a single thing.
Yeah, I guess the challenge is sort of modeling it in such a way that in your mind you don't confuse it maybe with something else as well.
I had this the other week. I modeled less, and my helper Rebecca, she was like, tell me, this less model you've done, how is it different to fewer? Oh, how is it different to fewer? Okay. And it isn't. Because what I'd missed in the model was less has a quantitative aspect. I don't know why, but we got to talk about beer when the two of us were talking about how to model less. If I have a pint of beer and I drink some of it, there is now less beer in that glass. If I have 12 pints of beer in front of me and somebody takes 6, there's now fewer pints of beer in front of me. And that's it. It's the quantitative aspect of less. There is less versus the full version of it. And it was like, right, okay. So then I ended up with the pizza with bits missing out of it. But Yeah, it's really interesting thinking the nuances. And it is all these words have got little things, and we're all guilty of it, of using less and fewer interchangeably, even though they technically are.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, until it sort of come up in just now talking about it, I'd never really just thought about the difference between trying to describe the difference between fewer and less, because a lot of the time they're just used interchangeably, and it's sort of a case of, well, I've used that one in a sentence a couple of sentences ago, so I'm going to use a different one now.
Right click thesaurus.
So yeah, I'm not just using the same word over and over again, but yeah, there is a
difference to it. Yeah, it's the less you don't really have that. There's less beer in that glass, but you couldn't tell me that I've drunk so many milliliters of beer. You just know there's less in it because I've drunk out of it. You can't tell me there's fewer beer in that glass. It makes no sense.
Not unless you wanted to quantify how much.
Yes.
That now has 3 fewer gulps in it.
Exactly, yeah. Or measure it. I can't believe I'm being fascinated how the English language works. But yeah, you think about how you model it, and that's where the mastery, as I've already touched on, is really dead simple and quick and bowls me over every time. But it's getting there with the models. Now you get better. It's not 250 hour-long models. I can do some in 5 minutes now. It's thinking about it, thinking about what the definition means, what it is, and it's like, you get like an, which is like a, but when there's a vowel sound.
Yes.
Oh God, how do I model that? So you spend quite a bit of time sort of going through it, and that's why you always need a helper, because they will pick up things that you're not, like with the less and fewer example we just spoke about. But as these pictures get improved, I've got 50 words in my repertoire that are no longer trigger words. That means that when I read them words, I just carry on with them, which means my threshold for confusion is going higher. It's like instead of being able to pull a 100 kilo deadlift, which means that when I pick up a 50 kilo box, it's not a problem. If I could pull a 150 kilo deadlift now, picking up a 100 kilo box is less of a problem, doesn't blow my back out, if that makes sense. Fit weightlifting analogy in here somewhere. Now we talk about Arnie.
Yeah, true.
So it's really impressive. And it's people are sending me stuff, and I'm seeing little things that they've sent wrong if they drop the wrong word in. And actually, I have to pause and go, what are they actually meaning here? Well, before I'd have just disorientated and read the sentence. There's a brilliant ad campaign going on for something I saw recently, and it's to do with neurodiversity. It reads, if you can read this, you're dyslexic. Okay, it's weird. And then I looked at it the second time around. It's like the words are jumbled. So I still retain the ability to do it. Let's not get this wrong. It doesn't take it away, because the disorientation is creative, as we spoke about in an engineering environment, all that kind of stuff.
In the book, he talks about how you're not getting rid of disorientation because it's a really useful tool when it's used appropriately. Yes. You're just learning how to consciously switch it on and switch it off again.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's all about positioning the mind's eye.
Yes. You have no control of it, no understanding of it, and not knowing it's happening. So particularly as we talk about words, it disorientates, you don't know, but you can consciously use a whistle, call it back on point, and then you start seeing all the stuff you put wrong, or the wrong word use, or the wrong sentence structure. Because here you started modeling some of the other words, like not just trigger words, but meanings. So consequence. We started doing like English language letters, like preposition and pronoun and all that kind of stuff to kind of get their meanings in, because if you got their meanings in, it becomes easier to work sentences out and get a feel for what's right, particularly if you are writing a thing down. And I should sort of preface this a little bit with, when dealing with a facilitator, they ask you what your goals are of the course. My course is tailored towards my specific goals. And if you're going on this course, you will have different goals that might tailor it slightly differently to you. And the book, as you say, is quite helpful in terms of if you've got a very good helper helping you out with the sort of basic symbol mastery stuff. I do think having a facilitator is important because they've seen it, they're used to it, and they understand it. They train a helper out. So it's my girlfriend, Rebecca, who is going to be on the next episode to hear her thoughts of being a helper in this program and how she's found dyslexia and being trained up to sort of read me doing things.
Yeah, and that's he talks about in the book, particularly when you're doing the course with somebody who's younger. It's just making sure there's sort of buy-in.
Yes.
Making sure that the person that you're doing it with is always engaged when I think he talks about sort of if the person you're doing it with, it doesn't seem to click. It might be just they're not buying into the process, rather than you need to make sure they're engaged, because it's not that they can't do it. It's just that they need the encouragement. And I think it seems to be particularly people who are perhaps younger.
Yeah, because it recommends not doing it until I think it's 8 or 9 years old is when it recommends starting doing it.
Yes, yeah. Because up until that point, the sort of ability to disorientate hasn't become an issue, because you're not encountering the schooling.
Yes.
That then develops the problem.
Yes, that's it. The ability is still very much there, and it's also, as you say, not becoming an issue. Although I got picked up at 6, my memories of being dyslexic tend to be more in secondary school, with the whole going out to extra lessons and all that kind of stuff. So I think, it says 9. I think it seems like a good point. They're old enough to be engaged, but young enough that the emotional side of it hasn't been developed yet, if that makes sense.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, I guess at that sort of age, 7, 8, 9, you're starting to encounter the sort of teaching that run counterproductive to the way that your mind works.
Yes, I think so.
And that's when the frustration and, as you say, the emotional...
Yeah, and that horrible thing of the teacher trying to get you up and read 2 pages of the book in front of the class. Somebody emailed me about this week, and you're like... I will sit in this corner out of their eyesight, and if they ask if somebody hasn't been done yet, I pretend that I've done it. Please.
I need to go to the loo, miss.
Yeah, please don't ask me. Please don't ask me. Do you know one thing that blew my mind with it? And I don't know if it mentions it in the book, but the sound part of it.
Yes, it does kind of touch that way. If you can sort of move your mind's eye and you're hearing from almost another location.
Yeah. And I must have missed that when listening to the book. But one of the things to do is, so it does balance. Remind me to come back to that, but it does hearing.
Yeah, there's not a huge amount on hearing, but it's sort of, he talks about all of your senses can potentially, that the mind's eye is the focal point for all of your senses. So he seems to focus on reading and your balance, well, except for taste.
Yes. So yeah, hearing was the one that blew my mind. Like one morning, can you wear a set of headphones? Disorientating hearing. So the example I got told was, you sat in a restaurant and you're listening to the conversation next to you, being just listening in for some reason, but it sounds like the conversation is really near. Like, yeah, you just listen to it, but the table you're sat on, the conversations have disappeared because you've disorientated your hearing to focus over there. So you've effectively done the same thing as mind eye does visually, which is easy to explain, but with sound. So there's this noise that they play in a set of headphones, and it's this ringing noise, and I'm listening to it. My facilitator goes, so describe the noise and tell me where you hear it. Oh, it's blah, 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 blah. And it's in my right ear and slightly travels across to my left in sort of stereo as it goes on. Oh, does it? When she says stuff like this, by this point, I've learned her by now. Like, uh-oh. Okay, so clearly it's not that. So, but listen again. So you listen again and again and again. I'm like, that's definitely in my right ear and travels in stereo slightly across my head. No, it doesn't. I could actually sit there and like you put your mind's eye on point, and it sort of they teach you how to pull the sound to your mind's eye, and all of a sudden it centralizes the sound. So now it's like, what's the sound sound like? Well, it's in both ears and fades out equally. Well, that's correct. The speakers are playing the same thing in both ears. It's kind of basically a doubled up mono channel. What? It's like, well, everybody's an ear dominant. That's not a dyslexia thing, but you're able to disorientate to it. So you're ear dominant and just completely disorientate to believing it's that side. And I remember visually feeling the sound go across my eyeballs, if that makes sense.
Yeah, right.
What? Hey, sound? No. But it was weird. Like I've had to tweak the bass and the treble of the stereo of my car because it now sounds different.
Yeah, it's very much a theme in the book, isn't it? Of dyslexia altering the way you perceive reality and voluntarily change the way you perceive the world. And he says we all perceive reality in our own way.
Yes. And I think that's it. It's the using it when you need to, but not letting it use you inappropriately, I suppose. You know, like particularly when it comes to spelling. But the sound really blew my mind. Like how much sort of stuff sounds clearer, better is quite interesting. You know, it's like, oh, well, hang on, everything's now out of both ears. Silly things like having a conversation with the telly on in the background. I'm less likely to disorientate into the TV. And what?
Yeah, I'm terrible at focusing. Either somebody's talking to me when a TV's on, just hearing the TV, or being sucked into the TV, or even in restaurants,
yes,
or in bars,
yes,
not being able to hear the person that sat next to me, but hearing the table over my shoulder perfectly and hearing the entirety of their conversation. So maybe you can teach me about this and see if I can apply some techniques.
Yeah. Any facilitators, email in.
One of the things in the book that obviously is quite close to the end that I found amazing was he talks about perception of time and your energy and the dial to control your energy levels. I thought that was amazing.
To expand on what the dial is, and different people have different ways, because like all visual things, you can create whatever the hell you want. Why not? And it's like, yeah, you calibrate this dial to how your energy's feeling. Sort of 0's asleep and 9 is like, either you're going to punch somebody or you're just exploding of energy, that kind of thing. And you can shift it like within reason. It's quite interesting how you can use the dial. Part of the sort of methods of getting you ready for learning is, you know, mind's eye on point, a balance exercise, which we haven't spoken about, checking where the dial is to check you're in. Like for me, I want to be, my default mode is about a 4.5 on my dial. So as long as I'm a 4.5 or a 5, I'm probably more of a 6 doing this podcast. It's fine. And actually trying to feel how other people's dials are, like how they've gone up and down compared to you. So you can get a feel for where you are relative to them. Because, you know, it's like if you're talking to somebody and their energy levels are 7 and you're at 3, it's a hard conversation, isn't it? You know, and they're like, whoosh. So what did you get from that, actually reading that? Because that's something kind of, I've not really spoken to too many people about the whole dial thing.
Yeah, I mean, I was just sort of trying to visualize it myself and thinking, right, can I do this? This should be really useful. I mean, just the concept of being aware of your sort of energy levels and your perception of time, because I mean, obviously everybody talks about it. Time slows to a crawl when you're doing something that bores you, and when you're enjoying yourself, whatever you're doing is over like that, and you think, oh, where did the time go? Potentially having some way to sort of influence that is sort of the concept of that, and the theory of that kind of, it was just sort of amazing.
Yes, I mean, I've not read that bit of the book because I obviously I got myself on a course rather than reading how to do it. And I didn't want to cheat the course by reading how to do it and then let my brain bake in the background and come up with loads of preconceived ideas. But yeah, the dial thing is quite interesting, and having I really need to integrate it a little bit more, but having a feeling of how other people are, I think helps. It just increases, because if I'm able to disorientate them on words and disappear into my own thing, well, what stops me disorientating thinking what other people are thinking?
Yeah, I mean, as you said, sort of if you recognise that your energy is at 3 and somebody else's energy is at 7, but if you could manually nudge your energy levels up a little bit to sort of sync with that person a bit more.
And I really need to dig into that more. I wonder if caffeine will become the old solution in that case, you know. It's like my coffee habit. Like, actually, I could just push the dial up, but I like coffee. I've modelled time very recently. What's it? A measure of change relative to a standard. Actually, I was talking about this with my facilitator this morning because we were doing a catch up. It's like, what is the feel of it? Are you feeling more an accurate thing of time? And I think I am. It's not something I've been making notes on. I've been practicing playing guitar, and I try to give myself 10 minutes, and I sort of start the chronograph on my watch, but don't look at it. And I'm like, well, this feels like I've been about 10 minutes. 9 times out of 10 now, I roll my watch round and I'm within a couple of minutes of it, which is good. The only time I found it doesn't work is I've picked up running again, and 10-minute runs still go on a lot longer than they really should do. Come on, I want to stop.
I remember that when I've not really been running for a long time, but when I started running, when you first start, you're sort of thinking, surely Surely I've done my allotted 10-minute. No, 2 minutes. Okay.
Yeah, you're waiting for the coach over the speakers. Come on, just tell me I can walk again. Do it now.
Yeah, surely I'm at least halfway through. No? Okay.
Yeah, it's interesting, the concept of time and just how I mean, I always remember younger, and I can't remember who this person is, but they always said I had no sense of panic. And I was attributed to it, maybe slightly big-headedly. There's no point in panicking, because if you panic, it still doesn't get done. But I do wonder whether it's just having no concept of time.
Yeah, maybe you're completely unaware of how close the deadline now is.
No, so just keep battering on as I was, because that's all I can do. But yeah, it is interesting. And we haven't spoke about balance, but balance is another interesting one. Now, I've not been formally diagnosed with being dyslexic, but I remember doing quite a lot of exercise at school with passing balls back and forth. And that's another thing, getting you on point. And one of the tests to see if your mind's eye is on its point is being able to stand on one leg and do stuff.
Yeah, and in the book, he talks about an exercise of your helper throwing not balls, but sort of like
they're called cush balls. They're like these. They look like loads of string. Yep. The reason they use them is because you don't have to worry about the bounce for catching it, because the sort of bounce bit is not really what you're learning. So stand on one leg and you weirdly end up being able to catch stuff. Like, huh? But we were doing something. Actually, it's when we were doing the grammar stuff, I think. So we're testing this all through. Right, stand on one leg and test this. And the ones that mess me up and I disorientate, the moment my mind's eye moves, my balance goes off and I have to put a foot down or I wobble. And it's a way of her telling over Zoom that one of these words was still slightly triggering me. And it's like, well, that's fascinating, isn't it? And you just do a calibration procedure every morning on one leg. And I always do my left leg because my left ankle's rubbish. And it's weird. Balance seems to be better. I need to try a few things that do test my balance a bit more. Now we're allowed to do stuff.
Yeah, it's because it's something he talks about throughout the entire book. Sort of, he says when he was younger and he'd have a moment of disorientation. I mean, in his example with a cat, he says you've got this moment of disorientation as he walks into the room, but because he instantly recognizes it, the moment passes and nobody really notices. But in class, reading a word, you end up disorientated, and it can lead to sort of motion sickness.
Yes. Yeah, I've never experienced that, but I understand from other people they get the kind of makes them feel ill because it's just going, the whole thing sort of, the world is wobbling as it's trying desperately hard to find a solution and basically does not compute by the end of it is effectively more feeling sick because they're going to ask me what this word is in a minute. Please ask somebody else, don't know. Because how are you finding it? Like we were talking as a bit of a prelim to this, weren't we? With reading about thinking in pictures versus thinking in narrative, and you were then listening to yourself.
Yeah, I was waiting to bring this in. The internal voice that gets mentioned early in the book, and he says as somebody with dyslexia, he says he's never really heard his own internal voice when reading.
Yes,
and it's something that I become very conscious of, particularly when I'm reading this book. Is sort of hearing my own voice in the head as the sentence goes on, and that I just can't stop it. And trying to read that paragraph about the horse.
Yeah.
Trying to picture it instead of hearing the words in my head was incredibly difficult. Me hearing my voice and compared to having a sort of a picture in my head, and in all sorts of situations. I mean, even when I'm driving the car, going somewhere.
Yeah.
And sort of thinking about something and sort of, I need to go to the shops, and it's a voice in my head. How do you sort of think that? Do you get that as a picture?
What the need to go to the shops kind of idea? If I'm not,
yeah, I mean, you sort of just the voice, just is not necessarily a voice in the head, but when you have your own internal thoughts.
So yes, So yeah, going to the shops, like directly you said, I need to go to the shops. The visual picture that instantly come up was I use the list app on my phone. So the shopping list appears as the list app.
So you visualize a shopping list?
Yes, yeah, that was the first thing I thought. You're like, I need to go to the shop, and you hear it as the voice at the back of my head. It's like, I normally have a visual trigger. It's like, oh, shop, this list comes in front of me, and I need to buy bacon, eggs, tomatoes, whatever. If I haven't written a list, I'm then trying to visualize what I need. Well, if I open my fridge door, what's not in it? I'm low on this. I've used the last salsa, so I need to buy some of that. You know, but I can see the inside of my fridge, and I don't know how you're seeing.
No, I mean, I'm just having this mental conversation with myself.
Ah, I see. The voices.
yeah. But yeah, no, it was just something that I found really interesting. Just spontaneous thought. And I was thinking, well, whether it's going to the shops or even when it's just, if I'm being clumsy and I'll sort of kick something in my head, I'm sort of screaming, turning the sort of inner voice, inner air blue. How does that work with you? I mean, are we sort of picturing like a Charlie Chaplin movie, some of the old silent movies?
I don't know really with that because that's almost you're thinking of the naughty words inside your head to suppress yourself saying it out loud in a place that's socially awkward, which I think is something slightly different. But yeah, if I stub my tongue on something, it's if I'm not allowed to use the technical expressions that you can use when you're in private for that kind of activity. I certainly don't think of a load of words. I won't swear inside my head if that happens, which is, that really hurts. And go sit down and deal with it. But I can't say there's an internal narrative that carries on. I'm in the pain area. Let's see. What about if we're spelling a word? So if I want to spell there, as in the possessive version of it, THEIR, my model comes up in my head with the word written underneath it, because part of the modeling is having the word written underneath it. So you master the word of the model, which also gets you to spelling in. How do you do it?
If I'm spelling a word, I will just hear the letters in my head. I hear the word and then sort of sound it out, whether it's by letter or syllable or depending on the word. Obviously.
Yeah. So there's another part of sort of other ways of learning to spell with this, that if you already have a picture for, so say vehicle. Now, you and I know what a vehicle is, so I don't need to model a vehicle because I know what it is. But I've got multiple spellings of vehicles. So we end up doing this thing where you cross the old spellings out in your head and physically on a bit of paper and then learn the sequence of letters and then recite it forwards, recite it backwards, recite it forwards in to make sure it's saved. But it's saved with the picture of vehicle. So I can see it like a vehicle comes up in my head. There's a motorbike, a car and a lorry all set next to each other at a set of traffic lights. And the word vehicle appears kind of in that image, but you just sound out VE, blah, blah, blah. So if I say vehicle to you, does it conjure up an image of a car?
No, it's just vehicle. But yeah, no, I don't really picture anything in my head.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. So we were talking, weren't we, about the beginning of a Tom Clancy book, and we think it's Rainbow Six, but I remember picking it up years and years ago when the two of us on holiday and started reading it. And it's this point where they're on like a decking of an oil rig or something like that, and it's the steel decking. And as I'm recalling it to you now, what I'm recalling is my visual memory of that, of it's this special units force and they're running up and I can hear the sounds on the footsteps of the metal grating and they're running up this rig and they're going into the room and they're about to get this guy. But I remember you saying, as we spoke before, that's not how you see it. You're just hearing the words come into your head.
Yeah, sort of. As you, it's funny though, actually, because as you were describing it, I was sort of thinking about metal decking and sort of the grid pattern that you'd expect to see on a rig. And as you say, the footsteps, I hear the footsteps. But when I'm reading something and I'm conscious that I'm reading it all the time, I suddenly become conscious of the words. And I don't know whether it's triggering this book particularly recently.
Messing with your brain.
Yeah. I'm not really aware necessarily of. It's difficult to do it without really thinking about it. I might form an image, but as soon as I think I've probably become aware of it, I'm just sort of aware of the words instead in my head. And that's predominantly what I'm reading and hearing, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think, I must admit, when I read stuff, it's like a constant movie.
It's interesting. Yeah, it's interesting because when I read, I'm very conscious of the words. But when I think back on, I was talking about Clancy again, there's a scene in one of his books Without Remorse. The main character is in his home and he's making a silencer for his pistol.
Yes.
And I've read the book a few times, so I'm quite familiar with the book, but I'm visualizing that scene rather than the words.
Yes.
So I don't know whether it's when I'm reading something at the time, I'm conscious. I feel like I'm conscious of the words, but afterwards, maybe because I've read it quite a few times, I've got a picture at that point, but I don't feel necessarily like I've got a picture that is being built per word. It's almost like He talks about we mentioned it earlier, the punctuation to picture.
Yes.
It's a sort of read a sentence and afterwards I can conjure an image. Whereas I think it sounds like sort of the way we've talked about it is that an image builds as you read the words.
Yeah, I think that's a better description, actually, is that we probably both end up with an image eventually because, pick a famous character that's in a novel that's now in a movie. That's somebody will say that's not how they imagined it. And I imagine that's just not all the dyslexic people. So I think you are right.
But it's almost like to build that image or to have that image afterwards, I have to sort of almost sit and think about the image. Whereas it sounds as though it's something that's just done subconsciously. Yeah,
you're reading it word for word, I imagine. And the words come in your head. Then the bit of grammar kicks in that tells you to stop and create a picture. Or let's put it this way. A full stop tells you to create a picture and frame it. A comma tells you to create a picture, but you need to add something next. I think when I'm reading something, particularly if we're reading fiction, I'm reading it and going along, visualizing stuff. And it's something I struggle to when I've read books that have already been movies, because I'm actually playing the movie to fit the narrative.
Oh, yeah.
So when I read Hunt for Red October, it's Alec Baldwin all the way with Sean Connery.
Yeah.
And that picture punctuation exercise stops. What's your picture doing? Is it correct? As we discussed earlier with the Arnold Schwarzenegger paragraph. But it sounds like what you're hearing is was blah, blah, blah. And then you hit that, and that's the trigger for you to go, what's it telling me? This, where I'm actually doing dynamically with the sentence.
Yes. Yeah. It's as though I absorb the words, but then have to go back and consciously build that image.
Yes. And that's, I think, where the disorientation happens, isn't it? Where we're dynamically building the sentence and I hit a word, I don't have a picture, so it falls out. This is fun, actually, trying to sort of understand who each other thinks.
Yeah, my mate, in the back of my head now, I'm just sort of flipping through all these different books I've read and conjuring up scenes from them. It's quite interesting. So I've got a series of Star Wars novels going in the back of my head now. I've changed authors to Michael A. Stackpole.
Oh, you mentioned Star Wars, and I like it. No, and now every listener's going to have that.
No, mine's a series of X-Wing. Right. So I'm sort of visually imagining a dogfight, which is wonderful.
Great. You know what's going to happen now? All the listeners are going to be like, can I hear everything in my head, or am I imagining pictures? What's going on? But it is like, just to sort of circle back to the book, but it is called The Gift of Dyslexia, and actually the method is teaching you the correct way of learning language and these other skills that suits your brain, but still retaining all the other gifts of it. I'm really impressed with it, really. It sort of liberated quite a lot of things for me. I'm really, really surprised at the results. And how quickly literally, I started a new job a week or so after the course and banging emails and stuff. Like, wow, this works. This is really impressive. And I'm sort of itching to finish the whole symbol mastery thing off to really see once I've got it completely down. Because
I can only imagine that it must be very liberating to have, because as you say, you've gone 36, 37 years, but up to this point, you've been told that dyslexia is a handicap for you. But there's actually this side of it that can be a huge benefit if only you can, as you say, gain the gift of mastery.
Yeah, there's a huge upside to it, and sometimes there's a few little downsides. But actually, if it's just a case with particularly the stuff this focus on, actually all you need to be taught is how to operate a Mac rather than trying to make PC work on a Mac, then awesome. Like they reckon once you've done the symbol mastery, your dyslexia correction is complete, which effectively means that nobody's going to be, well, they say you're no longer dyslexic, because dyslexic's a title you're given once you get into the school system. But actually you've just got a perceptual ability that is different from somebody who's neurotypical. And that brings lots of positive things to the world. Because during this podcast, haven't we? We've mentioned quite a few people who aren't neurotypical who've come up with quite a lot of things. So,
I mean, that's, I think we said earlier, it's the whole thing of Davis's theory is that dyslexia is really the sort of learned symptoms almost that you develop after trying to sort of learn symbols in the wrong way almost.
And there's one thing to it, and I sort of understand that this is quite hard to implement in a big classroom, but I don't see what the downside would be to modeling meanings of words to somebody who is neurotypical. Like, if you were taught words in terms of you had to get plasticine out and model them, you'd still be taught them. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, at one point, even in the book, he talks about there are elements of this technique that are beneficial if learning punctuation and learning sort of some words and things that can help improve reading literacy and sort of reading ability, whether you are dyslexic or whether you are sort of neurotypical or any sort of, they can be applied to anybody. And as you say, that they could be a benefit to anybody.
I think so. And I certainly, you know, one of the things we were talking about with my facilitator, it's like, they were saying like people going for exams can basically, if they model every word in the glossary of the book that the subject they need to. So imagine if you could model photosynthesis, which would be a hell of a model, but imagine modeling the meaning of photosynthesis. And then you're sat in a school exam and it asks you to describe photosynthesis. What do? You describe the model.
Yeah.
You know, and the picture comes up in your head and all you've then got to do is write it down. And I imagine quite a lot of people would benefit from sort of doing stuff like that. It'd be really interesting to see, but yeah, I don't see any downside to somebody who's neurotypical as well.
No, as you say, you could just sort of picture something you said earlier, a picture is worth 1,000 words. Even just where we were talking earlier, and I said I have these scenes popping into my head. I mean, they're scenes that sort of flash into my head in a couple of seconds. Yes. But they're maybe 4 or 5 pages worth of a book. And I know exactly what happened in that scene.
Yes.
And I can visualize it perfectly. I can sort of hear the characters talking.
Yeah, it's the reason why movies are 2 hours long and books are pages long. But you know, you mentioned Without Remorse earlier, and that bit in the hyperbaric chamber. That's like
the scene is just back.
Yeah, the scene is back, and you know the whole scene, don't you? In that bit, that is quite a lengthy chunk of the book. Really, it's nearly a chapter in itself. Yeah. But actually, we've just walked through the whole thing because we've reacted to that. The moment I said that, you're like, oof, because it's quite a heavy bit of the book. Great book.
Yeah.
If you could go into the exam with, I don't know, photosynthesis, whatever, modelled, periodic table, you just recall the picture and then it's there. It'd be interesting to dig into research. But I think if anybody it's definitely worth at least reading the book. And I recommend the course if you do know a dyslexic person or a dyslexic yourself. I think it really helps out with quite a lot of things.
I found the book sort of very, very interesting, very informative. So if you were coming at it from a perspective of a sort of a parent or a teacher or even a friend, it's really a really interesting sort of window.
Yes, I think so. And having spoken to you about it, it seems to have improved your understanding. So it's useful like that. Okay,
well, thank you for joining me again, Matt. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, it's been good fun having a chat about this.
Yeah, it's been really interesting reading the book and sort of learning a bit more about it.
Yeah, I'm glad you got a lot out reading the book. That's good to hear, and sort of increasing everybody's understanding how these things are is really important.
Yeah, I think it's especially important actually at the moment, particularly at the moment, people are relying on written communication probably a lot more, even more so in sort of the business and academic world than previous, where people are not face to face.
Yes, and it's a concern that people are going to go back to school and they're at different levels and stuff. So yeah, that is a very poignant point, I think. Well, thank you everybody for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this episode.
Thank you.
For show notes, please go to dyslexialifehacks.com/podcast.